Truth is one of the greatest things you can give somebody and one of the greatest things you can offer somebody.
He's an activist and advocate against gun violence, but wouldn't you know it, he's got his own story to tell, too. A big thank you to Cameron Kasky for joining me today. What's going on, Cameron?
I'm all good, just out here on the road. How are you doing?
I'm, I'm doing good. So, listen, when we talk about truth and authenticity, those two words alone, what comes to mind for you and what resonates most?
I think that the effort you need to make to respect somebody's relationship with their own truth is always what comes to mind because so often I feel like we can take somebody's objective truth and try to mold it into our own vision of the world. And I think that that's one of the sides of me that I try to work the hardest to beat is the side of me that says, nope, things are as I say they are. Things are the way that I see them. But, the reason that you see so many young queer people suffering, the reason you see so many people suffering from familiar trauma and similar things is their own truth is not being respected by another individual as the truth. And, truth is one of the greatest things you can give somebody and one of the greatest things you can offer somebody.
What kind of moved you to kind of keep having these conversations, obviously around gun violence, but around truth and authenticity, and really encouraging these conversations to continue in our country?
I feel like it has lost its prominence in the conversation in this country. I feel as though gun violence is falling by the wayside in terms of things individuals are actually interested in talking about. So while I do feel as though LGBTQIA plus issues are at the center of everybody's concern in the next year or so, hopefully less than that. But with what's going on with the Republican Party, it's looking like this is going to be a very big focus point. I do want to keep the conversation of gun violence alive, especially because of how disproportionately affects queer individuals.
And I definitely want to dig into this intersection of gun violence, and advocacy, and queer representation. But you're traveling across the country. How is that going, and what are you hearing from people? What is resonating most? What's the conversation like in the places you're visiting?
I wish I could tell you I was hearing something different than people don't seem to care as much these days. Everywhere we've gone, it seems as though the message from everybody is people care less and less every year. I mean, if you think about it, Parkland, it felt like the whole world stood still. There have been shootings more and nearly as deadly ever since that people can't seem to remember. It's challenging to remember the mass shootings that we see anymore. It's part of that's because the way that they're covered. Part of that is because of the way that people approach the conversation. So being on the road has been rewarding, and it's been very meaningful to speak with individuals who have been affected by gun violence in different cities in a lot of different ways. Whether that's an act of mass violence that happens in a small town that the media covers because it's affluent and white, or whether that's an individual from a community that's affected by gun violence on the daily and police violence, it seems as though the unifying message is, well, people just don't seem to care as much.
Where does your queerness come into all of this, and how can you encourage people to build on their own trust, to build on their own truth and authenticity, to kind of help carry through a lot of this conversation, especially in the time that we're in?
I think the biggest thing queerness for me and gun violence prevention advocacy have in common is the fact that I'm one of the most privileged people you could meet in either of those spaces, right? So I'm from Parkland, which is a wealthy white community that got news coverage because we were shot up in a major mass shooting, and a white community. If the Parkland shooting had happened in a community that was not white and wealthy, we would not have seen the same thing. Parkland was a shooting that was memorialized and remembered so greatly because of how Caucasian the whole situation was. That is the situation with my queerness. I am able to be out and public and vocal and all these other things while I'm a bi adjacent identifying person who says queer because I don't like to make people choose a letter if they don't want to. I know who I am. I know what I like to do and who I like to do it with. But I get to be very vocal and I get to be very out about it because I am very protected.
Yeah.
So gun violence prevention, queerness, you're going to see whiteness and you're going to see being cisgender as these forms of protection where you're able to talk about these things in a way that won't get you targeted or possibly killed in a way that it might somebody else.
Yeah, and we're using the word queer. I want to unpack the Q word a little bit with you. You identify as a queer individual. What does that word mean to you? And do you feel like your queerness has been hiding in plain sight your whole life?
Sure. So I think the same way that anything that's part of somebody was always there, it's been hiding in plain sight. I mean, everybody has their coming out story of telling somebody and that person being like, "I know," and it's like, okay, well, shut up, okay, because I didn't say it, so miss me with that "I know" nonsense. But I think that queerness to me is and this is not a quote that I would particularly pull. I think there's a Bell Hooks quote about queerness that really knocks it out of the park. But if I were to put it in my Cam Kasky baby words, it is to be a member of the LGBTQIA plus community and identify as an individual whose sexuality is not straight without having an exact letter that feels like it perfectly clicks for you. There's a bunch of different letters and a bunch of different sexualities in the ever growing list of definitions and sexualities that I feel some form of authenticity in. But when I hear the word queer, that checks out to me more than bi, which bisexual feels almost like and this is not for everybody because there are many bisexual individuals who it is extremely authentic to, but it feels a little bit like a compromise for me just because I feel like that I'm bisexual based on what I have experienced, not on what I'm open to experiencing, but also calling myself pansexual, that doesn't feel authentic either. I can't find a letter where that feels like it perfectly fits me like a glove. So I say queer because queer means I am in this community. I am a target of the people who will target this community. And I am an ally to my siblings, but I just don't know exactly what to tell you yet.
And all the conversations you're having right now with people, all the conversations you've had with yourself, weaving in social justice, your queerness into the advocacy work you're doing, looking at your experience on a whole, what would you say is your truth today? Who and what would you say is Cameron Kasky today?
I would say Cameron Kasky is someone who has gotten the opportunity to watch my mental health uh, come into itself and all of its darkest and brightest parts kind of find themselves in front of a lot of people. Because when I was 17, after the mass shooting at my high school, a lot of individuals were given. I was visible to a lot of people, and since then I have suffered greatly mentally, also been quite privileged literally, and the tense juxtaposition of those things, the degree to which I have behaved in certain ways when I've been out of control of myself, that's one of the things that happens when you put children on TV after a mass shooting is we happen in front of the world as we are becoming individuals, as we don't have a strong sense of self when that's going on. I knew what I believed after the shooting when I went on TV and started talking about the NRA. It's because every time I saw a mass shooting I said this is the NRA's fault. It's how I was raised. We talked about Las Vegas in my AP US history class with a young woman who's now deceased because of the shooting at my high school. And I always had an opinion on it, but I didn't have a strong sense of self. I was closeted, not that that has anything to do with your sense of self. And I had this very, very scotch taped together understanding of who I was spiritually, morally, and the whole world kind of got to see a little bit, and they got to see some very good things and they got to see some very bad things. So I'd like to think that I can come from a place where I can help other people, um, you know reach the peace with themselves that I've been able to make, and give themselves the forgiveness for their mental, for lack of better words, struggles and problems that they've had with themselves. But that's who I am in that sense. I'm also a Scorpio. I also do comedy. So there's a whole bunch of hoo-ha I could answer that with, but I guess my attempt to mean something answer is I'm someone who's been through it, who's seen those hypomanic depressive episodes and wants to make sure nobody else feels like that again.
And you are absolutely all of these things and more. So thank you.
Especially a Scorpio.
From one Scorpio to another, I appreciate you and wishing you all the best on the road, my friend. Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
To see more episodes of Truth Be Told, check us out at Plus Life Media and pluslifemedia.com. Until next time, let your truth be told.